I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I won't look back.
But you've got unreconciled relationships. You're fighting. You need to break it up. And if you humble yourself and you break it up, He's going to lift you up in honor.
In PPA, in the LBK, in PPA, in the AMA. No.
Experience Life, we're glad you're here. I want to say hello to all of our campuses that are joining us via video today at downtown or in Amarillo, church online, watching on TV at our Freedom Campus or one of our network churches. We're glad that all of you are joining us today as well. I want to ask you a simple question today. I want to talk some about it. And here's the question I have for you this weekend. It's this. Do you ever struggle to finish what you started? Think about it. Do you ever start something and then you struggle to finish it? Like maybe some of you started a home improvement project, most of us, and we didn't finish, all right? Because you ran out of money, or you're like me and you have no idea how to do a home improvement project. And so maybe that's happened to you before. Maybe you started back to school, like you didn't go to college, but then you wanted to go back, so you started back to school, and you didn't end up finishing just because you didn't have enough time to study and do homework and all of that. Maybe you started working out. You're like, dude, I'm going to get this body in shape. I guarantee I am. But you didn't finish what you started because Doritos, a couch, and a TV sounded better than military press, all right, up in a gym. So you just had trouble finishing what you started. Now, I got to be honest, okay? I have trouble with this in a lot of areas. But especially when it comes to putting together my children's toys that they get for Christmas or their birthday, for some reason, I don't know why. Anytime they have a birthday or it's Christmas, we get toys that somebody, and I'm the man of the household, that somebody has to put together. It never goes well for me, okay? I don't always finish, because here's my problem. First of all, it's like a playhouse. Here's what I've determined. Parents, you know this. Playhouses that you have to put together for children are from the devil. I'm just going to say that at the outset. It's the devil made it up, I think, or something, okay? Because I get the playhouse, and I'm always missing parts. And here's my luck. I'm usually missing the parts that you have to have, like for the thing to stand up. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like pulling out a drawer of my dresser, using it as the side of the house, or something like, not really, but I mean, I'm having to figure this out because I don't have all the parts. And then the instructions, and some of you guys, you know how to do stuff, you don't need the instructions. I need the instructions. Here's the problem, okay? You've noticed they're usually written in like 4 languages, right? Like German, French, Spanish, English. I guarantee you, so one guy had to learn 4 languages in order to write the instructions, and he learned English last. It was his 4th language. I look at the German, I'm like, it's totally clear. I look at the French, I'm thinking, I bet they understand how to put this playhouse together. But the English never makes any sense. It was a 4th language for somebody, I guarantee it was. Here's an example, all right? I think I saw this on a toy one time or something. Here's just an example, just so you know how terrible this is. This is in the instructions, right? Run-on sentences. Put the 3/4 inch screw in hole A while keeping your thumb on hole B, so that hole C can receive the 1/4 inch nail before hole D is drilled through. And make sure that the 3/4 inch screw in hole A doesn't drill through base C, because then you've ruined everything and wasted $200. I mean, that's how it usually is, right? I made that up. I wrote that. Just to get them. I want to send that to the manufacturer and say, this is what it sounds like, all right? Because I get down to this part and I've wasted everything because I don't have anything. Okay, so I'm just not handy. When it says I need a Phillips, I think ConocoPhillips and wonder why the playhouse needs gas. I don't understand, okay? I'm not a handy person. And so with my children's toys, I have trouble finishing what I start. Maybe you have some areas in your life where you have trouble. You start okay, but you don't finish so great. Well, there's a church in the New Testament that had this problem. It's a church that Paul started, a church in a town called Corinth, which is in modern day Greece. And basically what Paul was doing is he was going around all these churches and he was trying to raise some money. You know why he was raising money? Maybe you know this if you read the New Testament. But he's raising money because there were these believers in Jerusalem that were extremely poor. And he wanted these churches to come together and get all this money together and send it to these poor believers in Jerusalem. And do you know why he wanted to do this? Because they were being persecuted. The reason they were so poor in Jerusalem is because, again, the Jews were still trying to squash the Jesus movement. So it's hard to find a job if you're Christian. You might be locked up in jail if you're a Christian. You can't provide for your family if you're a Christian because nobody wants to be around you, have anything to do with you. So the Christians are having trouble in Jerusalem, and they're very poor. And Paul's like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put some money together. We're going to get together. These churches, Corinth, you guys, other people, we're going to get together. We're going to raise some money for them. We're going to take it to them. We're going to take care of our brothers and sisters in Christ that are in Jerusalem that are suffering. And basically, he tells the Corinthians that they started out pretty good, but then it kind of went downhill from there. So he writes them a letter. It's called 2 Corinthians in your Bible. He writes them a letter. He's going to give them some advice. But before he does, he tells them about two different kinds of generous people. He said, first, Corinthians, listen. He said, and this is a little background before we get to the text. He said, first, hey, Corinthians, you guys heard of the Macedonians, like Corinth, modern-day Greece, just north. The Macedonians, y'all heard of them? Oh, yeah, we heard of them. He said, have you noticed how poor they are? Yeah, they're poor and they're struggling. He said, but they're extremely generous. Have you noticed that? Like, he told the Corinthians, hey, the Macedonians, they've been begging me to give money toward this gift to the persecuted believers in Jerusalem. They've been begging to be a part of it. Like, they're trying to give more than they can afford, and yet they're very poor. He said, that's an example of generosity. Then he points to Jesus. And Paul says, hey, and you know, Jesus, he was so generous, he gave up his life for us. And then he says, I want to give you some advice. So if you got a Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning in verse 10, a word to anybody who would say, hey, I've started something, I'm just struggling to finish what I started. This was their problem. He gives them some advice. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning in verse 10. Let's take a look together. He says, here's my advice of the translations. Here's my opinion, Paul's saying to this group of people. He said, it would be good for you to finish what you started. Why don't you go ahead and finish what you started a year ago? Last year, you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. Like, you wanted to give to help the persecuted believers in Jerusalem, and you actually started. Now, you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Paul's saying this. Hey, Corinthians, you did pretty good at the beginning, but then it fell off. You need to finish what you started. In other words, he's saying, put your money where your mouth is. If you're saying you really care about these believers that are suffering in Jerusalem, why don't you do what you said you were going to do? Why don't you take up a collection, raise some money, let's send it to them, let's help our friends, our spiritual family. Let's help some folks in Jerusalem. Why don't you finish what you started? Now, we get it, right, with the Corinthians, especially when it comes to giving. When it comes to giving, you know this, isn't it difficult to finish what you start? I mean, it's easy to get motivated and get started, but isn't it difficult to finish what you start? And here's why. I mean, you know why, right? Why it's so hard to finish what you start with giving. Here's why. Because giving, if you're taking notes, involves spending less on ourselves. Doesn't it? Whether you're a teenager and you get an allowance, whether you're working full-time, part-time, but you have a certain amount of money, you recognize if you give some of it away, that means you get to spend less on yourself. So we recognize a lot of times if we give, we might not be able to buy that thing that we want, right? Can't buy that flat screen you want. Can't buy that car you want. Can't buy that house. Can't upgrade your cable package. Can't take that vacation you want. Because we recognize if we give, we can't spend as much on ourselves. And you know what happens a lot of times? It makes us scared to give. Do you know why giving is so scary for so many people? Because they think less for me means I'm going to be less happy. And the goal for most of us, the reason we accumulate stuff and buy things or whatever, is we want to be happy. So you're thinking, if giving means less for me, that means I'm going to be less happy. And because I'm desperate to be happy, then I'm scared to give because I want to be happy and that'll make me less happy. We've all been there. And here's the thing. When you get to that point, it's a very dangerous place to be. When less for you and more for the poor is a bad thing, that's a dangerous place to be. When less for you and more for a church is a bad thing, that's a dangerous place to be. When less for you and more for a friend struggling financially is a bad thing, it's a dangerous place to be. Why? Let me tell you why. Because it says something about your heart. What did Jesus tell us to love? Matthew 22. What did Jesus tell us to love with all of our heart? He said, first and greatest commandment, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But sometimes, too often, isn't this true, church, in our culture? Instead of loving God with all of our heart, what do we love with all of our heart if we're just being real honest? We love our money, right? Because we think more of it is the key to happiness. The way you know you love your money with all your heart is that you're kind of scared to give. It's hard to be generous. It's just a sign you love it with all of your heart. And here's the thing. Here's what you don't realize sometimes. What you love with all your heart is what you worship. And what you worship is what you're looking to be a God to you. So too often we turn money into a God, and I think you know this. I talked about it some last weekend. But money is a false God, yet it's a favorite God of many people at all of our campuses, of many people that live in America. It's a false God, but it's a favorite one because we're looking to it to make us happy, and we think less of it means less happiness. So we're not too sure about releasing some of it to help others. Let me show you what the real problem is when we kind of struggle to be generous like the Corinthians were struggling with. Here's the real problem. At the root of a giving problem is a God problem, lowercase g. We've traded gods. We've traded the one true and living God for a false God. There should be a big G right there. For a false God, and it's only a matter of time before you realize you've made a bad trade. The false God we've traded the one true and living God for is the false God of money or seeking happiness ultimately in stuff. And we're going to recognize when we begin to worship it rather than God, we've made a bad trade, because here's the thing, you got to get this. Money cannot save you ultimately, and it cannot satisfy you ultimately. Do you not watch TV? Have you not noticed that some of the wealthiest people seem to be some of the most miserable people? That's not because having a lot of money makes you miserable. It's because sometimes when you have a lot of money, you start to trust it to do things for you that it can't. And that makes you miserable. There's some people you see on TV you want to be like, and you're like, I want to be like that person because it seems like they have everything. They can buy anything they want, and then yet their family's a wreck, everything in their life's a wreck. They're talking about how unhappy they are. Why? Because they're looking to money to be a God, and it's a bad one. It's a false God that can't save or satisfy. Here's what's so amazing, though, about giving. That's why Paul's encouraging him to do this. Giving is you publicly declaring, I love God, not my money, with all of my heart. Giving is you saying, I love God, God, I love you, not my money, not my stuff, with all of my heart. Because see, God can save and satisfy. Money can't. You trust it to do that for you, it ain't gonna help you. But God can save you, and He can satisfy you. He's the one that created us. He knows how we can be the most happy. He's wired us to be happy. And it's not just through the accumulation of stuff, yet that's what most people in America believe. And yet they wonder why they have so much stuff, and they're still so unhappy. Another great thing about giving too is you get to be a part of seeing the hungry fed and the lost get saved. When you help organizations that are helping the poor, when you help organizations like the church, it's getting the gospel out. I was looking it up this past week, but at Experience Life since 2007 when we began, we've had now over 8,000 people indicate they committed their life to Christ at this church. Over 8,000. Isn't that unbelievable that 8,000 people have told us, I committed my life to Christ here at this church. That's unique, people. We're not counting them twice. 8,000 people. I mean, that's what you get to be a part of when you're generous with whatever God has given to you. So here's what Paul's saying to the Corinthians, and he's saying to us, hey, with giving, it's hard to finish what you start, but here's what you got to do. You got to finish what you started. If you want to experience all God has for you in this life, you got to finish what you started. And again, like the Corinthians church, I mean, come on, right? We have the same problem. It's hard to finish what we start. Like you'll hear a motivational talk. Maybe you've come here before and you heard a motivational generosity talk about helping the poor and the church and all that. And you're like, I'm motivated. And you fill out a card, or you listen to the radio and they're raising money. You're like, oh yeah. And you make a phone call, you check some boxes. This is like on a Sunday. Then by Tuesday, you're like, what card? Did you see that iPhone? That new iPhone, have you seen that? And then we just totally forget. We start well, we're motivated, we sign up, and then we quit. And we don't finish well what we start. And Paul's saying, hey, if you have that trouble, guess what? You need to finish what you started, especially with giving. You want to experience all God has for you in this life. So what does that mean for you? How would you finish what you started? Let me just give you a few ways. Some ways to finish what you started when it comes to giving. Number one, first is this. If you've taken the 3-month tithe challenge here before, Why don't you finish what you started? Some of you sign up, you're like, I'm excited, and then I forget about it. Or you go a month, you're like, just kidding. Or 2 months, and you're like, I changed my mind. Like, why don't you go, hey, if this is so important that Paul's writing about this, maybe I need to finish what I started. And for those of you that don't even know what this is, tithe just means 10%. So we challenge people to try it for 3 months. We escrow their money, and then we just give it back to them if they want us to, if they didn't enjoy the challenge. Like, generosity's for the birds. Give me my money back. All right, then we will, okay? And so we hold on to it. But some of you just need to try it again. You need to finish what you started. And here's what's true of this 2 Corinthians text. Is chances are all the people in this church he was writing to were already giving well over 10% of their income away. And he's asking for more money for the poor in Jerusalem on top of the 10%. Now, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do a talk about that today. That'd be fantastic. But we've kind of lowered the bar a little bit so everybody can kind of jump on. That's why we encourage people, just start with a tenth. Just start with $1 for every $10 you make. Easy place to start. It's where God started with the people in the Old Testament. Now, I know some people hear that and they're like, well, if it's in the Old Testament, I don't want to do it because I just do the stuff in the New Testament. I totally understand. You're a grace giver, you're a New Testament giver, totally makes sense. That's why you should start with 11%, not 10, because 10 is beneath you. I totally get it. All right, so 11 or 12, show us up. Show us up. Those of us kind of go into the low standard, show us up, okay? But surely you don't mean you want to give less than God required of the poorest Jew in the Old Testament. Surely not if you're giving back to God under New Testament or grace conditions. So this is a way to respond. Another way is this. If you took the increase challenge, finish what you started. We do this each year where I challenge you to do what my wife and I have done and been blessed by for years, and that is, why don't you consider increasing your percentage that you give each year by 1%? So go from 10 to 11, 11 to 12, 14 to 15, so on, 19 to 20, wherever you're at, why don't you go 1% more each year? If you've maybe started it, but you haven't remembered and you thought, oh no, I think I'm gonna do something else, why don't you finish what you started? If you recognize that generosity is important, you want to give more this year than you gave last year. I don't know anybody that says, hey, I hope to give far less this year than I gave last year because I didn't like doing that last year. That was kind of crazy. No, people don't say that. We want to be more and more generous. My wife and I, at the beginning of this year, kind of had a moment of crisis where we recognized if we did this yet again, and we've been doing it since we got married, if we did increase by 1% yet again, it would mean less going toward retirement this year. And I'm all for saving up for retirement and stuff. I think that's great. But we had a decision to make. Do we do it again, or do we say, no, retirement, we need to put another % there? And we just decided we'd rather retire on a little bit less and be very generous now and continue to finish what we started now than retire on more and say, kind of forget the increase challenge. So for some of you, that may be a good way to finish what you started. Another way is if you committed to begin giving a certain amount or percentage, finish what you started. Maybe you've come here before and you're like, I'm going to start giving this much per month to the church or toward a nonprofit or whatever. Fantastic. You still doing it? Why don't you finish what you started? Or I'm going to give this percentage of my income away. That's fantastic. You still doing it? If not, why don't you finish what you started? It's a great way for those of you that have just chosen a certain amount or percentage and you decided you didn't want to start at a tenth. And then last, if you haven't started anything, why don't you get started today? And when people tell me, hey, Chris, I've been reading my Bible, just became a Christian, I'm wanting to get started giving, where do you recommend I start? I always recommend they start giving 10% of their income away. Just because that's the low-end standard of Christian giving. If you read early authors, post-New Testament, talking about what Christians were doing, most of them say they were at least giving 10% of their income away. So I tell people to start there because it's really not that much if you think about it. It's $1 for every 10 that you make, right? And I just thought, hey, when I kind of got started and recognized I wasn't being very generous years ago, that I'm going to jump to $1 for every 10. I'm not going to start ripping up dollars and start giving God pennies and nickels and stuff. I'm going to start at least where the poorest Jew in the Old Testament was required to start, and then I'll try to get up to New Testament giving and go way beyond that in time. And so you can, if you want today, on the back of your connection card, you can check, I want to start tithing, and that's a way you can get started, and we'll sign you up for that 3-month tithe challenge, and we'll give you all your money back after 3 months if it's just something you just thought, man, it wasn't worth my time. So we'd love to give you the opportunity just to try it out. Be awesome. And here's one thing that's helped my wife and I over the years that might help you as well, and that is On our website, you can give in a number of different ways. And you can also set up your gifts to be recurring, which is great. It's a way you can prioritize it so that every time you get paid or on the first of the month or on certain days of the month, you can give a certain amount to the church. And I'm sure you can do that with other nonprofit organizations as well. But I'm kind of just, since I'm a pastor at a church, talking about the church end. But you can set up recurring giving, and it's a way you can prioritize your giving and say, hey, this is important to God, and so this is important to me, and I'm just going to have it come out automatically. Paul's challenge to you and me, regardless of your age, your young teenager, or your great-great-grandparent, is finish what you started. When it comes to giving, care about the poor. Care about getting the gospel out. Care about the things that matter to God, and finish what you started. I want to show you a video. It's a video of a lady named Tamra. She's the children's director at our downtown campus, and I just want her to share with you how beginning to give has really made an impact in her life. Take a look.
I had parents that were very generous and very consistent in their giving. My brother and I had to each week give part of our weekly allowance, put it in our little envelope and take it to church. And my parents even, when I was in college, would give to the church I was a part of because it was a church plant and didn't have that much. And so that set a foundation for me, looking back, seeing them give and how important it is in my life to give. But after college, I started to become selfish with my money and was giving more sporadic. It was actually a season in my life where I was distant from God. Things had happened. And so I think that played into a part of just holding on tighter and my trusting in Him. It took a while, it took a few years before God really worked in my heart and began to show me not only could I trust Him with my money, but I could trust Him to heal a lot of issues that He needed to heal. In graduate school, I had a pastor who challenged us to give consistently. And so I took that challenge. And not soon after that, I was able to start working for a family who was very well off, but they were very generous. And so I started taking care of their son a couple times a week. And about 2 weeks after that, I found out that I needed 4 new tires. And the money that I made from working for them was exactly what I needed to pay for those 4 tires. And it just proved to me, or reminded me of how faithful God is, even in the little things. When we're generous and we give Him our resources, He is faithful. That moment pretty changed the way I think about giving. Because if I think about giving like as money, I become selfish and I'm tempted to hold on to it. But I think about giving as God's faithfulness, because God has been faithful to me my entire life, and He will always will be. And He is faithful to use the little bit of money I give to transform people's lives. And that's what I want to tap into. That's what I want to be a part of.
Would y'all help me thank Tamara for sharing? I want to share with you a quote, and then I'm done. We're going to sing together. This is by a guy named C.S. Lewis. Some of you know him. He's written a book called, many books, but one's called Mere Christianity. And he was a former atheist, actually. Became a Christian, wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Some of you read that, seen the shows. But he said something as he kind of wrestled as a Christian through this whole subject of giving, and I just thought it was really great. So I want to share it with you. It's kind of convicting to me, but I think it captures 2 Corinthians 8. I really do. He said, I don't believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. That's what Paul said the Macedonians were doing. They were giving more than they could afford because they were Christians. And that's what you do, because you serve a generous God and you give like Him. In other words, he says, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc., is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. If we have the same stuff as everybody else that's at the same income level as us, chances are we're not giving much away, because they're probably not giving much away. So if we have the same amount of stuff as they do, then we're not giving much away, or else we'd have less, right? Because giving means less for us. Then he goes on to say, "For charities do not at all pinch or hamper us. I should say they're too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charity's expenditure excludes them." Did you catch that? There ought to be some things we'd like to do, but that we're not able to do because we just give so much money away. That kind of sounds like the New Testament to me. That kind of sounds like the early church. That kind of sounds like 2 Corinthians chapter 8. The question is, does that sound like you? Does that sound like your life? Why would I do a talk like this? And we talk about this regularly. The reason we talk about giving is because we believe it's an experience God doesn't want any of us to miss. Some of you are looking to experience God in a fresh way, and your surest way to experience Him in a fresh way is to release the tight grip that you have over your money, to stop loving it with all of your heart, and by giving declare, "God, I love you with all my heart, and I want to be a part of the things that are important to you, even if that means less for me, because less for me and more for you, that's not scary, God. That's a good thing, because all my stuff, all my money, it belongs to you anyways." You see generosity throughout the Bible. Generosity has kind of always characterized the Christian community. They give stuff away, not only to those among them, but especially in the first couple centuries of the church, they were known for giving their stuff away to people that weren't even in their community. They would take care of other people's poor, not just their own poor. It's just what Christians do. Why? Because they serve a generous God, and so they're like Him. And when you love God, not your money, with all your heart, then you release your money to do things that change the world, that change people's lives. Giving is an experience. Generosity is an experience God doesn't want you to miss. But so many of you here at our church, so many people at all of our campuses, so many people in our country, they miss this experience. Because we have a false God as Americans, a lot of us. It's greed. It's desire for more and more and more and more, hoping it's going to save and satisfy, and it ends up leaving us empty. I want you to experience all God has for you in this life. This is one of the things He has for you. If you're not a generous giver, every generous giver at our church, and we've got many of them, would tell you you're missing out on God's best for your life. Don't do it. Don't do it. Let's finish what we started. Many of you have started well, but let's now together finish what we started. Would you pray with me at all of our campuses? God, thank you so much just for the clarity of the Bible on the importance of generosity. God, make us a generous people. I pray that people would be shocked, our friends, family members, coworkers, neighbors, would be shocked by how much we give away. They'd be shocked by the fact that we don't have certain things because we want to give more money away, because we don't love it with all of our heart. We don't trust in it to save and satisfy because it can't. They'd see that we trust in you and that we love you, God, with all of our heart. And that's why we're generous. It's been characteristic of the Christian community since the New Testament. But too often in our country, I don't know that I always feel like it characterizes us very well. And it needs to. I want it to, Lord, for our church, because we want to experience all you have for us in this life. God, help people today, maybe many of them, to jump from nothing to 10% or 2% to 10 and go, hey, I'm giving at least the amount the poorest Jew in the Old Testament was required to give. And God, maybe even prompt some to jump to 12 or 13, saying, I want to be a grace New Testament giver. I want to give even more away than what might be the minimum. God, that many people would take the 3-month tithe challenge. Many people would get generous, and not just toward the church, although I believe this is a worthy organization to be generous to, but toward people that are feeding the hungry, toward people that are taking care of orphans, God, toward people that are helping the poor all over the world. God, help us to be a generous people. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for checking out one of our messages today. For more information about our church or to watch other messages, you can go to our website at experiencelife.now.com. Let us know if we can serve you in any way, and we hope to see you real soon.